everybody. It's Rikki Heller from rikkiheller.com. I help people on restricted diets learn to cook, eat, and love their food again without feeling deprived or giving up your favorite foods so that they can focus on healing and get back to living their normal lives. I want to tell you a little story. So, some of you might know that I just went on a 10-day detox. The first time I did this was in 2015, and I'm going to report on this one too. But I was kind of chronicling what I ate on Instagram, and I had put up a dish that had some sweet potatoes in it. And almost immediately, one of the readers added a comment that said, "You can't eat sweet potatoes on a Candida diet, they're too high in sugar." So I think this is something that a lot of people think to be true. I mean, can you eat starchy vegetables on an anti-candida diet? And so that's what I want to talk about today. And I guess the first consideration, so when I went on my first anti-candida diet back in 2009, my naturopath put me on a program that included starchy vegetables, including sweet potatoes, included beans and legumes, included nuts and seeds, and I was allowed to have both a starchy vegetable and a serving of grains each day. And believe you me, I ate them because I wasn't giving up my sweet potatoes if I could have them. So I was thrilled to be able to eat that stuff. So if you go online and you look at the various practitioners who have anti-candida diet programs, and I say this all the time, there are as many anti-candida diets as there are practitioners. And even if you look at the big guys who are the most famous and have the biggest programs, you will find that about 50-50. Some allow sweet potatoes or other starchy vegetables, some don't allow starchy vegetables. So what is the reasoning behind that, and how do you decide what you can eat? So I've kind of altered my own personal philosophy about this over the years, and I want to explain why I think, for me anyway, it's totally fine to eat starchy vegetables. And obviously, we're not talking about reams and reams and reams, we're talking about in moderation. But there are two considerations here. The first is it, you want to look at the glycemic index, and then you also want to look at, is it good for candida? So I think most people consider that a ketogenic or a really low carb diet would be great as an anti-candida diet, right? Because we know that fungi, molds eat sugars, they love sugars. So if you go really low carb and really low sugar, you're just going to starve it out. And I did think that way initially. And so in the beginning, I was eating a lot of coconut oil based foods. I was eating coconut oil specifically because we all know that coconut oil is a really good antifungal. And that's kind of a more ketogenic approach. I was eating very low carb and higher fat. But what I found was there was kind of like a tipping point where if I had been low carb for a few days and I was also eating the higher fats, it came to a point where it just went into overdrive. It was too much for my body, and I would feel slightly nauseous, maybe dizzy. My rash might flare up again, all these very unsavory symptoms, and I couldn't figure it out. And I realized it was the fat levels. I can't eat ketogenic. So here's what I came up with. So my first question was about the glycemic index. Are we spiking our blood sugar so much when we eat those starches that we're feeding the candida? And when it comes to sweet potato and most starchy vegetables, the answer is really no. If you look at the glycemic index of most of those foods, like let's take sweet potatoes, for example, they are low to moderate. Now, it depends on how you cook them and obviously how much you eat. But in fact, you want to be looking more at like the glycemic load, which is the overall effect of the foods. And so, unlike, say, an actual starch like potato starch or cornstarch or arrowroot or something like that, or really highly refined food like white flour or white sugar, a sweet potato is going to raise your blood sugar, but at a very slow pace. It's going to reach a plateau, and then it is going to slowly decline. You're not going to get these spikes that are going to really flood your body with high blood sugar levels. So that's not overly feeding the candida, we think, that way. Then the other question, the second question, when we're not looking at sugar levels, but if we want to look at, is it good for candida to avoid starches entirely? Is that going to be better? Something like a ketogenic diet. That one I think also is not true. As I said, some anti-candida diets allow starches, some don't. But what about the effects of these foods? So there's a guy named Paul Jaminet who is a scientist. He was actually an astrophysicist first, but a brilliant guy. You can look him up on the internet. So he studied this because he was affected by candida. He was ill for a while. So he actually studied the organism and how it operates and how it feeds. And it's kind of creepy to talk about, but going way down deep into those details. And what he says is that the candida organism is considered a eukaryote. And that just means that the cells have a nucleus and a membrane, just like human cells, as opposed to a prokaryote, I think is, prokaryote, which is like bacteria, which don't. And because of that, they can feed on whatever we can feed on. So they can eat fats, they can eat carbs, they can eat proteins. And the second part of that equation, as he says, is their particular membrane is water soluble. So operates very much the same way as the human body. And because ketones are water soluble, they can pass through that membrane and feed those candida cells directly. So what does that mean? Well, if they can eat whatever we can eat, and some of the experts actually believe that candida cells prefer ketones to sugars, well, then you don't want to have an excess of ketones in your body because you're just going to be feeding the candida. And I found this to be true with a lot of my coaching clients who may have come from a ketogenic diet, and they're asking me why they're not getting better. And they actually are feeding their body too many ketones. They're feeding the candida these ketones. So you want to be careful about excess anything, right? So true, you don't want too much blood sugar, but you also don't want too many ketones. And the fact that these cells are so similar to ours, that's actually the reason why you can never kill all the candida, because what works to kill the candida cells could kill us too. So if you kill all the candida in your body, you're going to be dead too. And that's what prescription drugs do. They don't kill the candida, they just prevent it from propagating. So you want to have some in there for a healthy body. So that's the whole ketone thing. And I think I very much what Paul Jaminet says makes a lot of sense to me. And it also is validated by my own experience. When I was more ketogenic, I just didn't feel good. Add to that the fact that the George Mattelyan Foundation, which is the website called World's Healthiest Foods, that's the site they have a recent article on sweet potatoes that cites a recent study that says sweet potatoes could actually lower your blood sugar. And they may be really good for diabetics. And I know it's like totally counterintuitive because they taste sweet, but in fact, these are a food that's high in fiber, they're high in nutrients, and that's going to mitigate the effects of blood sugar, of raising your blood sugar. And so they are not going to necessarily spike blood sugar. And he says they, in fact, might work to lower blood sugar. So that was like, yay, I can eat sweet potatoes because they're one of my favorite foods. So if you're also a lover of sweet potatoes, that's good news for us. So bottom line, if you're considering should you eat sweet potatoes on a candida diet, I would say those are the two main considerations. Look at how it affects your blood sugar, what's the glycemic index. Also, the opposite, going low carb, how does that affect your body? How does that affect the candida? And the answers I came up with were they're not high glycemic, so they don't spike blood sugar. And if you go really low carb, you're going to increase the ketones, which is a favorite food of candida. And in fact, you might feel worse. That said, as always, you should always, always listen to your own body. So again, I've worked with lots of people who come in eating sweet potatoes. We try it. It may not work for them. So then they don't eat sweet potatoes. You just have to have common sense, right? If I felt ill every time I ate sweet potatoes or if my symptoms flared, of course I wouldn't eat them. But I think you shouldn't discount them entirely before you even try them. Now, that's just my personal opinion. But, we have so many delicious whole foods in the world. And if you're already feeling restricted on an anti-candida diet and you can add more of those foods back in, why not give them a go? So I hope this was helpful. If it was, please do give it a thumbs up. And more importantly, share it with somebody that you think will benefit from this information. I also wanted to mention, talking about all the foods we can eat, I am going to be introducing a new program soon that I am really excited about that has to do with compliance on our anti-candida diet. So stay tuned. I'm going to be talking about that in a little while, and I'll be back with more next time. Take care, everybody. Bye.